In the 19th century, the ideals of individualism, limited government, and capitalism gradually spread to most of the nations of Western Europe, helping there to overthrow the ancient regime, the monarchy and the legacy of feudalism. For the next 100 years, individual rights, freedom, and capitalism existed exclusively in Western Europe and North America. What were the results of such freedom in the Western world? One economist, Angus Madison, estimates that in Europe in 1700, just 300 years ago, according to evolutionary biology, human beings have been on this earth for roughly 3 to 4 million years in some form. It's 300 years. It's a long time relative to human life expectancy, but it's a snap of the fingers in terms of history. Just 300 years ago, per capita income in Europe was roughly $265. Even I make more money than that. $265 in parts of the that's roughly what the figures are in most of Africa today. So I think as pre-capitalist, pre-industrial revolution Europe, I think of it in my own mind as third world Europe, borrowing Mao Zedong's term of third world countries. This was a third world country. Most European nations were akin to large parts of Africa today. Desperately poor, famine-ridden countries in which the human life expectancy did not reach 35. But Britain's technological and industrial revolutions of the late 18th and 19th centuries brought enormous progress. For the first time in centuries, probably going back to classical Greece, for the first time in centuries, the minds of common men were freed from bondage to the feudal aristocracy and the established state religion, free to ask and answer scientific questions, to apply newly developed principles to practical concerns, to invent technologies, to industrialize, and to manufacture vastly increased supplies of consumer goods. James Watt, as one outstanding example, perfected the steam engine, the so-called work engine of the Industrial Revolution, which immeasurably increased the human ability to manufacture the goods their lives required. Another example of the commoners now freed by the principle of individual rights. The great medical man Edward Jenner created a vaccine for smallpox, possibly history's deadliest disease. George Stephenson pioneered the design of locomotives and the construction of railroads. All of these thinkers, and dozens more, were commoners whose minds and activities would have been stifled under the ancient regime that continued to hold sway upon the European continent. Never mind the rest of the world, which was mired mostly in tribalism and brutal monarchies. It was Britain's far greater political economic freedom that provided the social conditions her most innovative minds required to promote unprecedented material progress. In the 19th century, based on the advances in applied science, technology, industry, medicine, and agriculture made possible by the liberation of the human mind, the standard of living increased dramatically. The life expectancy rose significantly from the low 30s it was under the pre-capitalist systems, and Europe's population roughly tripled in the 19th century. In Britain, the freest European nation, per capita living standards rose while the population more than tripled. That's staggering. That's historically unprecedented. Per capita income rose while the population more than tripled. What that means, of course, is that increasing that production of consumer goods, production of goods and services had to be more than triple, had to quadruple or more. For example, real wages in Britain at the turn of the 19th century. And what economists mean by real wages is income measured not in terms of how much money you make, but income measured in terms of how much you could buy with your money. Income measured in terms of purchasing power, of what individuals can buy with their money. Real wages, this is the key. I'm not an economist, but I know economics 101. I know this is the real key to raising living standards, is real wages have to rise. Real wages around the turn of the 19th century in Britain showed an average increase in excess of 60% for farm workers, over 86% for blue-collar workers, and more than 140% for all workers, including white-collar ones. One practical result of such rise in real income was the end in the Western world, starting in Britain, of the ages-old practice of child labor. For now, mother and father were able to support their offspring without the need for the children to provide income. Child labor exists today, and in a widespread form, all over the non-capitalist third world, and only there. In the United States, economic progress was even more dramatic. Capitalism and the technological industrial revolutions reached their full fruition in America in the late 19th century. The technological advances are staggering. We can go on for hours just on them alone, so I'll just essentialize it. Cyrus McCormick's Reaper, Samuel Morse's telegraph, Alexander Graham Bell's telephone, Thomas Edison's electric lighting system, Henry Ford's mass production of automobiles, the Wright brothers in aviation, and 1,000 other things. William James pioneers the field of experimental psychology at Harvard. George Washington Carver revolutionizes agricultural science at Tuskegee. Mark Twain is writing, the skyscraper was born in Chicago and flourishes in New York. John Roebling perfects the suspension bridge and builds his masterpiece, the Brooklyn Bridge. All of this in the late 19th century in America. It's astonishing. This establishes America as the most progressive nation of history and the wealthiest. Per capita living standards in the United States doubled between 1790 and 1860, and then double again between 1865 and 1915. This at a time when the country absorbs millions of destitute immigrants from Ireland, Sicily, and East European Jews. America's unprecedented productivity, led by such giants of industry as Andrew Carnegie, John D. Rockefeller, James J. Hill, Edward H. Harriman, J.P. Morgan, et al., kept American output so far ahead of population growth that the country's high living standards were becoming legendary as early as the turn of the 20th century. Part of the revolution in productivity brought about by capitalism was that famine, the scourge of all non-capitalist systems, both historically and currently, was wiped out in the free world. We are in America proudly the fattest people of history. Advances in both agricultural science and agricultural technology are responsible for the tremendous cornucopia, the just immense abundance of food produced in America and the other Western countries. With less than 2% of the American population farming, they've made us all fat. They've made our pets fat. They've enabled us to ship food all over the country. It's just astonishing. There has never been a famine in the history of a capitalist nation, ever. The significance of this is too often overlooked. In less than a century, capitalism proved mistaken the Malthusian doctrine that population growth inevitably outstrips food production. Malthus is tragically correct, however, regarding all non-capitalist societies in which the mind is enslaved to some dictatorship and the mind's role in productivity is then stifled. Further, freedom in the Western world led to profound moral results. The principle of individual rights that formed the foundation of capitalism, known during the 18th century Enlightenment as the rights of man, led to an abolitionist movement, first in Britain, then in France, and then in the United States, that succeeded in the 19th century in wiping out the ages-old worldwide horror of human slavery. At least in the West, slavery still exists all over the world today. I mean, Sudan is Exhibit A, North Korea would be Exhibit B. God knows how many other places. But in the Western world, slavery was wiped out by the same principle of individual rights that gave rise to capitalism. People don't realize it, although I have a chapter on this in the Capitalist Manifesto on slavery. But abolitionism and capitalism are intellectual cousins. They have both flowed directly from the principle of individual rights, which underlies them. Additionally, the principle of individual rights gave the free countries of the West the moral courage to stand tall against the monstrous evils of collectivist dictatorships in the 20th century.